Welcome to Living Outside the Matrix, the show for thinking people where we question important issues in the mainstream narrative. Hi there, I'm your host, Nigel Howitt, and on the show today we're going to take a look at a great example of living outside the matrix and thinking outside of the box. I'm going to be talking to Tao Wimbush, the founder of a pioneering and radically different way of living in an eco-community in West Wales called Lammas. And the goal here is not to advocate any particular lifestyle to people, but more to illustrate how we can think for ourselves and design a whole new way of living that better serves people and better serves our human needs. The overall goal, as I've stated on the show before, is to thrive and to enjoy peace, security, freedom and abundance, and perhaps most of all, happiness. So I do hope you enjoy the show. Tao Wimbush, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and a very warm welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
So maybe you could start us off by giving us a little bit of your background, Tao. How did you, become a man thinking and questioning the way you live, and how has it led you to where you are today?
Okay, that's quite a big question. I grew up in a fairly regular suburban household in Berkshire. I progressed along the conveyor belt of education until I reached 20, at which point I was studying architecture at Cardiff University. At that point, I went on an adventure. I went looking for this mythical place called Teepee Valley, and I found it, and that completely changed my life. I was really inspired to find an alternative society living within the UK with a completely different set of values that centred on looking after the earth, that centred on spirituality and love and peace. And Teepee Valley is quite a large settlement. At that point, there was something like somewhere between 70 and 80 households living there on in excess of 300-400 acres. And I fell in love with the place. And that was a big turning point for me, because since then I have lived in alternative communities my entire life. And it's my experience in Teepee Valley and other alternative communities that led me to set up Lammas. In a way, the Lammas Eco Village is based on not just my experiences, but the experiences of others, all kind of put into a melting pot. What worked, what didn't work, and Lammas was what we came up with.
Fantastic. So perhaps you could describe in a nutshell, what is Lammas? Where is it? What is it about?
Okay, so Lammas is a small eco village in Pembrokeshire. It is 9 years old, so we've been on the ground here for 9 years. We purchased degraded agricultural class 4 land. There was nothing here really, sheep and grass, that was it. And over 9 years, we've turned it into a mosaic of diversity and productivity. There were 9 households originally. That has since blossomed. There's approximately 15 now, and that number keeps growing. And in essence, we are a collective of small holdings. That's how I would describe us. And so each small holding is unique and different, and is a reflection of the ideals and the aspirations of the people living there.
Fantastic. So I understand that it was a sort of a dissatisfaction with ordinary way of life that led you to really seeking a different way of living. So questioning everything about the way you grew up, and redesigning a way of life that better serves your needs and the community that you've created's needs of peace, security, abundance, and I suppose ultimately happiness as well. So what are the sort of, did you sort of have a list of guiding principles when you sat down to create your planning application? Because for listeners and viewers outside the UK, it's not a straightforward deal to buy some land and move on and live on it, as you still can in other parts of the world. This is emphatically not possible within, what's referred to as the United Kingdom. I'm in England, and Tao is speaking from Wales, which is sort of technically some people consider another country under the United Kingdom. So it's not. It's not a foregone conclusion that we can live like this. So what were your guiding principles, and how did you go about the process, Tao?
Okay, so Lammas came about through a kind of a series of opportunities. One of the key opportunities was that following some Welsh Government research, Pembrokeshire had launched an innovative planning initiative, a bit of a trial in a way. And to understand the impact or the significance of that trial, I need to take a little step backwards to explain the planning system in the UK. So in the United Kingdom, the planning system was devised after the Second World War. And in the trauma following the Second World War, it was decided that every piece of land would have a label on it. The Town and Country Planning Act divided the towns where people were allowed to live from the countryside, which would be reserved for agriculture. And that's been the guiding principle of all planning and all development in the United Kingdom ever since. The people will live in the towns where we can easily service them, and the countryside will be reserved for agriculture. Now, following this Welsh Government research, there was a slightly different approach to that said, okay, well, maybe we don't need to follow this so rigidly. Perhaps people can be distributed into the countryside in something close to like a traditional smallholding pattern, which was very common here in Wales. And so this policy was created, which basically said, okay, we'll let you build a new smallholding in the open countryside, provided that you're living sustainably, being productive with the land, and building naturally. And so it was the launch of this innovative planning initiative that really spurred myself and the other founders on to create Lammas, because that was, if you're familiar with UK planning law, that's an unprecedented break. And it was too good an opportunity to miss. And so we wanted to create a flagship project that could demonstrate a wide range of buildings, lifestyles, land productivity systems that could be a flagship to inspire others. Because at its heart, the project is about, from my perspective, the project is about reconnecting people with their roots. I grew up in an average suburban house. I turned on the light switch. I didn't know where that electricity came from. I flushed things down the sink. I didn't know where that went. There was no connection to the land-based. Food came from supermarkets, and everything was, all those services were delivered to you. Whereas what this way of life does is it reconnects you with your land base, because you source your own water, because you sort out your own waste, because you source your own fuel and your own food. You become familiar with the service loops that keep you alive, and in that way you reconnect with the land base and you develop some roots, and that is an incredibly nourishing and rewarding experience.
Absolutely. It gives you a context for your life, doesn't it? A real context. I think one of the problems with the conventional Western way of living, particularly here in the UK, is that people are very much divorced from, as you say, where food comes from and all these things. We live in isolated little boxes with a postage stamp garden, and we go to work and we come back, or most people do, and this is a disconnect from the context of our lives. And I think one of the things that's very, very important is taking contextual account, and I'm sure you'll probably go on to tell us about things like permacultural principles and all the principles you've used in your designing of your eco village. are 100% about the context, whether or not it's orientating your house towards the sun for passive solar heating, etc., etc. So fantastic. So that's sort of that window of opportunity, with its stated principles, allowed you to sort of slip in there and kick off your project.
Yeah, although it wasn't quite slipping in there. There was quite a kind of hoo-ha about it. About it. We had a lot of local opposition. People were very worried about what it was we were trying to do. It was unfamiliar. It was scary. It took us quite a long time to get through the planning system. It took us 3 years. It was a huge amount of paperwork, a huge amount of bureaucracy to try and explain what it was we wanted to do, and to work within a framework that enabled planners to evaluate and kind of assess and feel confident that we were going to succeed, and that we had created a system that couldn't be abused. And since we got through, we've been very lucky, and also worked hard to scale that policy initiative up so that it now covers the whole of Wales. Yeah, it's called One Planet Development, and so the theory is anybody can buy a piece of field or a piece of woodland in Wales, and in theory design a self-sufficient small holding to support themselves, and that way get to build their dream house and create a lifestyle that exists within the remit of one planet. So, people only using their fair share of the Earth's resources.
Okay. I must just quickly interject and apologise for the rain on the roof of this yurt for any listeners of the podcast. One of the aspects of yurt living is that you're so in contact with nature and the outside world, is that the rain falls on the roof, and of course we can hear it. So I do hope that doesn't interfere with anyone's audio experience. So the idea of low impact, I guess, was very much ingrained in the project from the start, not only by yourselves and your personal principles, but also the planning. Can you explain to us a little bit about what is low impact and why, and perhaps what is sustainable and why? Maybe those two interrelate.
Yeah, it's about. It's about evaluating what it is you're doing, so that on balance you are of positive benefit environmentally and socially and economically. So, for example, we our particular small holding is called Maesmellingech. It's 7 acres. So that we took 7 acres of degraded pasture, and we've planted a whole mosaic of orchards, short rotation coppice, vegetable gardens, herb gardens, little patches of woodland, fruit growing areas, ponds, and I've personally witnessed the ecology return from nothing. I've seen the insects return, and then I've seen the birds follow them, and then I've seen the mammals come back, and so we're seeing wildlife here which hasn't been seen on these fields in decades and decades, and so that's incredibly encouraging. And I also use a car and a washing machine and a laptop, and so it's about trying to create a system which weighs up the pros and the cons, so that on balance you are providing a good service to the earth, if you like, and similarly that good service to the earth is about providing a good service to local society and local communities, because by virtue of living here, we use the road system, we use the libraries, the swimming pools, the health services. What can we provide as a counterbalance to that? Well, we open up our land, we give guided tours, we give courses, so there's a whole educational aspect of what we do. And then there's the whole promoting the principles of sustainability and trying to provide a positive vision for the future of humanity. And so these things get weighed up. Similarly, economically, how productive are we being with the land? Well, we can evaluate how productive the land was before we got here. We know roughly how many sheep were living on here and how many lambs were raised and how many lambs were sold. And then similarly, we evaluate what we produce ourselves from the land, both that which we produce for our own consumption, food, fuel, electricity, water, and then also that which we sell that gets sold into the local economy. In our case, we sell a lot of fruit, we sell Christmas trees, we sell livestock, and table birds as well. So
So productivity is very much a key principle then, in terms of not only providing for yourselves but also offering value back into the community.
Yeah, if you look at it from the government's perspective, it's like, okay, so if we're going to take land out of agriculture, given that all land is either town or countryside, so if we're going to dedicate countryside land and take it away from conventional industrial agriculture and set it aside for permaculture, which is in essence what we're doing, we want to be reassured that it is still being productive. In fact, our productivity far outweighs that of conventional agriculture because we can provide attention to detail that a conventional farmer simply cannot.
Can I just interject that? To start with, when you mentioned 7 acres, is that your personal holding out of the whole community? And what's the acreage or the size of the whole community?
Okay, most of the plots here are approximately 7 acres. Some of them are a bit bigger. What's happened is since we started, so the original planning permission was for 9 small holdings, and since then there's been a whole load of peripheral land and plots sold and applications going through. So it's kind of reached a point. Well, on top of that, we've had people moving into the local villages who play an active part in eco-village life. And so it's got to the point where it's not very easy to draw a line around the eco-village and say, you're in and you're out, because it's much more kind of fluid than that. I would say that the eco-village community is approximately 50 adults and 30 children and covers an area of land of approximately 150 acres.
Okay, and again, just to get an idea of that, gives us a good idea of the population density. What was the original parcel of land you bought for your planned 9 small holdings? What was the size of that be?
So that was 76 acres, and that was part of just one farmer's estate, one local farmer's estate, and that was simply down to grazing sheep, and that, prior to our purchase, brought in an income for that farmer of approximately £3,500 a year.
Okay. Do you have a figure that you could venture, an approximation as to how much you've increased the productivity of the land on average?
It varies year to year, but it's something in the region of £75,000 to £100,000 worth of produce a year from the 9 small holdings.
Okay, excellent. So let's look into sort of how the community works. It sounds like a fascinating idea. Do individual members have ownership of their respective parcels of land? In other words, do they enjoy exclusive right of access and exclusive right to decide what they produce, what they plant, what they do?
Yes, in short. So everyone has exclusive rights to their own plot, if you like, and then there are areas that are held in common, which include a village green, include the trackways, include a mill pond, include a community centre, and also include a mini electricity network and a hydro.
Great. And are these facilities and land parcels effectively held with the commons of your community? Are they managed by a group of representatives from your communities? It's sort of collectively managed, as it were. Okay. Fantastic. And I assume also then that each member, if that's the right word, is that the word you use for the community? Just so that people know what we're talking about. Each member obviously operates economically independently. I'm guessing, with the context of whatever parcel of land they got, which way it faces, what sort of soils on it, what they grow, what they produce, and obviously tailored to their specific personal preferences, I guess. Is that the way it works?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so each plot has a quite different approach to that. For example, my neighbour keeps bees and sells bee products. She also raises crops for seed, which gets sold to a local seed retailer. A plot on the other side is a basket maker. She grows willow and creates willow sculptures, and also runs willow workshops. And so each plot has a different take. And it's also worth saying that most of us here also have part-time work elsewhere. We're not exclusively kind of bound to the farming lifestyle here on the plots. Most of us have other lines of income, whether it be teaching or nursing or gardening. So there's a lot of interaction with local communities. Yeah.
Fantastic. So just for our listeners, it's not really a question of winding up the drawbridge and rejecting mainstream culture. It's more a question, as I see it, Tao, correct me if I'm wrong, it's more a question of redesigning a way of life that integrates the best of all ways of life to try and design an overall better way of life. Would that be
That's it precisely, yeah. It's about designing a lifestyle that is tailored to your individual needs and strengths and abilities, which enables you to bridge both worlds. The world of living in a beautiful environment, as part of an ecosystem, in harmony with the nature around you, as well as playing a role in mainstream conventional society and all the kind of trappings that brings. And the principle is that because you can buy land at agricultural rates, because you're building naturally, the actual infrastructure, whilst intensive in terms of labour inputs, isn't massively expensive. And so for a relatively affordable amount of money, you can set up your holding and your lifestyle and not be unduly burdened by mortgages and such like. So as an example, as a household, we have invested £70,000 in our small holding. And we've got a 7-acre small holding with a lovely house, a whole range of outbuildings, totally productive gardens. We have a mortgage on ours of £20,000, but essentially our bills are relatively low. Our biggest cost is the car, and second to that is our phone bills, and that's kind of it. Because we grow most of our own food, we harvest our own water, we make our own electricity. So yeah.
You've mentioned, of course, that the community's growing, which sounds great. Do members come and go, and have you had people sort of sell up and other people buy in, and to what extent is the community sort of open to the free market? Because I imagine the first issue that springs to mind as an outsider is, well, we might want to sort of vet who's coming in. So how does that work?
Okay, so we are nobody's left yet. The life's too good.
That's a good sign.
So nobody's actually sold up yet. But in theory, if a plot was sold, that would be sold on the open market. However, it's not quite as simple as that, because the planning restrictions are quite strict in many ways. So anybody buying one of these would have to subscribe to a land-based lifestyle, a self-sufficient lifestyle. We have to produce annual reports for the local planning authority. So, there are checks and balances in place to make sure that these eco small holdings remain that.
Okay, so that's an interesting point. So there's if you like an ongoing contract with the government that you must meet certain criteria as conditions for your being there. Is that a fair summary?
To subscribe to this kind of lifestyle, in a way, that's something you need to be aware of. It requires a degree of transparency, in a way.
Okay, that sounds fantastic. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about the, I mean, it strikes me as being a very rewarding way of life. I mean, my way of life running a 3-acre small holding here in Hertfordshire is not totally alien to yours, but is there a reasonable amount of prosperity? I imagine at the beginning, obviously, when you start with a blank field, it must have been 100% hard work, which is, you would expect nothing else. 9 years on, you've talked about the wonderful patchwork mosaic of the things that you've created over 9 years, and the level of productivity, is it now affording people a reasonably, should we say, comfortable way of life? I get that it's maybe a simpler way of life by various judgments, but are people relatively well off in an overall sense? I think maybe the listeners might be interested in that sort of thing. Can you talk around that?
Yeah, and I think my answer to that would be mostly. Now, you're right, it's been a lot of hard work. It's a real tough call coming from a conventional background. Most people who've come to live here at Lammas, unlike myself, most people came from cities and had little or no experience of growing food or building. And so to come from that to quite a challenging landscape, we're quite high in the hills here. We're 175 metres above sea level. It's quite exposed. Winters are quite long and quite tough. It does require work and real commitment. And some people have absolutely thrived and are living in prosperity, and that's not necessarily true across the board. I'm not going to paint a utopian picture. There are some people who are still kind of challenged by the setup of it. I'd say 3/4 of people love it, are thriving. They've got good quality of life, spring water on tap, fresh food on the table, renewable electricity, a sense of meaning and fulfillment. And some people are still struggling with the setup. Now, yeah, it's really, having watched people over the years, it's been really interesting, because it's not necessarily the people you think who have kind of thrived and succeeded. It's not actually based on people's experience. It's more based on people's ability to turn obstacles into stepping stones, and to be flexible enough to navigate the challenges, and to be humble enough to admit when you're wrong and to learn from others. Yeah, it's really interesting. And as well, as a movement, we learn a lot from each other. There's not just here at Lammas, but the whole One Planet development movement. There's a lot of communication between small holdings, because there's One Planet development small holdings popping up all over Wales now. So we're communicating with each other, what works, what doesn't work, this is a good way of doing it, this is not a good way of doing it. And so there's a lot of learning goes on amongst ourselves, which is helping. So in some ways, the new plots that are starting out now have the benefit of learning from our mistakes. yeah, and that's really, really good. That's really, it could, because it's becoming easier. So, for example, when we started out, it was 3 years through the planning system, and we've struggled with our setup. We've made decisions that haven't necessarily been the most expedient. Whereas people coming along now, they're generally getting through the planning system in 4 to 6 months, and they're hitting the ground prepared with a strategy that's going to see them set up relatively quickly.
having broken new ground and inspired people and sort of cleared the way to some extent for people following your path. You must find that very rewarding.
Oh, it's incredibly encouraging. It's incredibly encouraging to see the new applications coming through and flowing through, and to see people hitting the ground running and succeeding with it. It's lovely. Yeah.
It sounds as though the whole community, it must promote a great sense of empowerment, your way of living, I should say. A great, not only connected with the land in a very literal sense and nature and the natural world in a very literal sense, but the fact that people are building their own settlements effectively. Or is that something that happens exclusively under this banner? Is it all about self-build as well?
It is mostly about self-build, and it can happen on like an individual small holding scale, and then scale up to eco hamlets or eco villages like Lammas. And yes, it is incredibly empowering to know where your water's coming from, to have laid those pipes, that take away your own grey water and channel that through reed beds such that it's returning to the ground clean. It's really, really, yeah.
Two of the issues that I see addressed by your project and the whole concept of perhaps a more, should we say, land-based way of living is that it seems to address two very important issues today, namely an explosion of ill health and also an explosion, or some call it an epidemic of depression. A lack of rewarding, meaningful, happy existence. And I think this is very exciting to see that your project goes a long way to addressing both of those. I think there are other health issues around the food that we choose to eat that people need to be aware of. But the fact that you guys are by definition out there in the environment, you're living an active lifestyle, you're literally probably grounding with the earth, which has been proven scientifically to benefit our health. There's a number of factors there that really support a more effective way of living, a way of thriving, if you like. So would you say that the overall consensus of the community is that they've moved from a way of living that was less rewarding, less meaningful, giving them less happiness, to one which is, has increased all of those factors? Would you say that's true?
Yeah, definitely. And the fact that nobody wants to leave is testament to that. Yeah. In many ways, it's a return to simplicity. We're high up in the hills here. We're blessed by clean air. We're off the mains water system, so we're blessed by spring water. We're eating food from the gardens. Our lifestyles demand a level of fitness, and that in return is rewarding in itself, and that we feel healthy. We're in constant contact with the earth and with the natural cycles, and so that in its way brings its own therapeutic processes. Yeah, absolutely. It's a tonic in the context of a society in crisis. Yeah.
The last important aspect that I want to address really is the issue of freedom, and as many people may realise, increasingly in the Western world at least, our freedoms are being curtailed. I'm not blessed with the same planning infrastructure in my locality in Hertfordshire, just north of London by about 30 miles. That there is a far more stringent approach in the UK governmental planning system, which sadly as yet precludes projects such as yours happening here of the same nature. Not to say that it's impossible, but it's a different context. But the overall issue of freedom, it sounds as though you have a much freer lifestyle, and yet you mentioned earlier that you do still have these obligations to meet in terms of the contract of being able to stay there. So speak to us a little bit about the freedom, and maybe you could also if you could also nail down precisely what those contractual obligations are.
Freedom is really important to me. Really important to me. I get up in the morning and my day is very dependent on the weather and what jobs I'm doing and how I'm feeling. If I need to take a day off, I take a day off. If I need to take a week off, I take a week off. If I want to work till and finish work at 4 p.m., I'll finish work at 4 p.m. And if I want to work till 9 p.m., I'll work till 9 p.m. And that is really, really important to me. And yet there is a contract. I write a report each year which demonstrates to the local government that I'm being productive with the land, that I'm being of benefit to the ecology, I am building with natural materials, that I am providing some kind of social benefit in terms of education and transparency as to what I'm doing. And how I square that with myself is that's all good stuff. You know, that's all good research. That's all demonstrating that what's possible and proving the case for this lifestyle. In essence, I feel really privileged. I feel like for whatever reason, I've been blessed with an absolute unprecedented opportunity to get a piece of land, to be able to live on it in today's world in the UK, which, as you state, is a pretty rare thing, and to be able to live a lifestyle that suits me, that revolves around real things like wood and fire and water and soil and leaves and roots and animals and eggs, and all this kind of stuff. That's what's really important to me. And yeah, I feel privileged, and in a way, the contract or the payoff of having a degree of transparency and demonstrating that I am continuing to be of benefit is a small price to pay for the freedom that I enjoy.
For people that might be interested to know more about your lifestyle and Lammas specifically, I believe it's a short distance from Aberystwyth in West Wales. How can people contact you? And as you mentioned that people come and visit, can you tell us a little bit about how people might be able to get in touch with you and get inspired to maybe reevaluate their own lifestyles?
Sure. Well, I would say to learn a bit more about the Lammas Eco Village, our website's very good, www.lammas.org.uk. To learn more about this planning policy opportunity in Wales, I would point people towards the One Planet Council, oneplanetcouncil.org, and to point people towards getting in touch with me personally, or because I run a range of courses, I do guided tours, I would point people to my own website, which is the lammasearthcentre.co.uk. And any of those resources is good. And yeah, come check it out. There are open days, guided tours, there are courses, there's lots of information online. There is an opportunity. It is possible to completely redesign your life. There is a proven viable route out of the rat race whereby you can move back to the land and create and design a lifestyle, a self-sufficient lifestyle for yourself or for your household or even for your community. It's possible. There are ways. Yeah.
Wonderful stuff. Well, Tao, it sounds like an amazing achievement, a personal achievement for you, and I personally take my hat off to you for what you've achieved. And it sounds wonderful in offering or blazing a trail, if you like, and showing people the possibility. Because I think one thing that is lacking often is true vision, which is the ability to see perhaps what doesn't yet exist, but to be able to create and see opportunities to make things better. And you've really nailed that. So many thanks on behalf of probably lots of other people that won't have the chance to thank you for doing that. And in some respects, you're the precedent that you've set. You've already talked about it snowballing across Wales. That sounds fantastic, and it serves other people like me in other, and indeed in other countries where but more specifically me here in the UK, that you've set a precedent. You can demonstrate, and we can point to you to say, look, these guys are doing it. They're being more productive. Because as a quick tangent, one of the things about your land use method and broadly permaculture, as you said, is that it actually hugely increases the productivity of the land over and above the standard monoculture. And when we drive around the countryside near where I live in Hertfordshire, it's dominated by rapeseed, field beans and wheat, which are three sort of dubious and questionable crops, anyway, and the whole monocultural way of raising them is less efficient, less earth friendly, less wildlife friendly, less human friendly. So anyway, in a nutshell, a great big thank you to you, and to all the listeners and viewers. I do hope that you're inspired by this, the achievements of Tao Wimbush at the Lammas Eco Village, and inspired to maybe reevaluate the way that you live, and to question all the assumptions of what's possible and what is normal, what's acceptable, and maybe even dare to redesign your own life. So thank you very much to everyone for listening. I do hope you got some value from the show today, and I encourage you to visit the website www.lawfulrebel.com for more stories and crucial information to help you thrive. And meanwhile, I do hope you'll join me again for another episode of Living Outside the Matrix.
Thank you.